What if I told you that McLaren had a car capable of dominating, and they didn't know it? What Oscar Piastri did in Qatar was not just a fast lap. It was a technical revelation. What exactly did he find and why had no one discovered it before? Oscar Piastri arrived at the Lusail circuit carrying more doubts than certainties. The young Australian, who in 2024 had made it clear that he was not just a promise but a real threat to anyone on the grid, seemed to have faded slightly in the first races of 2025. McLaren, for its part, had not yet found the ideal balance for the MCL39. Although the internal data showed progressive improvements, the sensations on the track did not match. And to that we had to add the heavy shadow of the disaster in Las Vegas. A double disqualification for excessive wear on the sliding skids, attributed to extreme porpoising that had shaken the team's confidence in its own aerodynamic concept. A technical blow, yes, but also emotional. In this context, the atmosphere in the McLaren pit was tense. Andrea Stella, team leader, avoided triumphalist statements. Lando Norris, current championship leader, maintained his usual composure, but his body language showed that the car was not performing at the level expected. And Piastri just kept silent. He remained focused, away from the media noise, as if he knew something that others had not yet discovered. Because the true talent of a driver is not only in pressing the accelerator, but in detecting, interpreting, and adapting to the hidden nuances of the car. And that's what he did. When the lights went out on the SQ3, the world saw a different Piastri. His driving was surgical, with no room for error, with an almost perfect balance between aggressiveness and control. In each curve of the Qatari layout, the MCL39 responded with unusual precision, as if it had finally found the sweet spot of its aerodynamic behavior. But it wasn't the car that had changed overnight. It was Piastri who had understood how to take advantage of it. The lap he set, 1 minute and 20.055 seconds, was more than just a number. It was a declaration of principles. Beating George Russell by just 32 thousandths and leaving behind Lando Norris, his own teammate and direct rival in the fight for the championship, under equal technical conditions, not only surprised the engineers. It shook the very structure of the team. It was the validation of an intuition that Piastri had been pursuing for weeks. The car had more. It just needed to be unlocked. And he did it. The most dramatic thing is that no one expected it. The press, the analysts, even the paddock itself assumed that McLaren would continue on a downward curve, at least in terms of sprint classification. And yet, in the midst of that sea of uncertainty, a young driver with less experience than most of his direct rivals managed to not only challenge that narrative, but break it completely. Because in Formula One, statistics are useful until someone like Piastri appears and writes a new page. That pole position at that time and in those conditions was more than a sporting result. It was a message to the rest of the grid, to McLaren himself, and above all to Norris. The balance within the team was beginning to break. And it wouldn't be silent. Andrea Stella, team director, defined it as an extreme car. And this is not hyperbole. Every element of MCL39 has been pushed to the edge of what is allowed. Starting with the front suspension. McLaren has taken the anti-dive concept to a level never seen before. The lower anchorage of the upper arm is located so low that it almost lines up with the drawbar. This is not just a structural decision, it's an aerodynamic statement. This design reduces the center of gravity, stabilizes dynamic behavior in fast corners, and ensures a rigid platform that keeps the diffuser working in its optimal range throughout the turn. It doesn't tilt, it doesn't sink, it doesn't shake. It's like a table. A performance table. In Qatar, that structural rigidity became an absolute advantage. The Lusail circuit, with its constant radius curves, high lateral load areas, and perfectly smooth asphalt, rewarded cars with stable aerodynamic platforms. And that's exactly what the MCL39 offered. While other teams struggled to maintain balance in the fast sequences, the McLaren seemed welded to the asphalt. There were no abrupt corrections, no unexpected losses of traction. Just efficiency. The secret was not only in the suspension. The real ace up the MCL39 sleeve is its floor. At first glance, it may seem like an evolution from the previous year, but under the chassis, the story is very different. The design of the Venturi channels has been thoroughly revised. McLaren introduced a keel on the leading edge that acts as a natural flow accelerator, generating a peak of negative pressure right where it is needed most. This translates into more downforce without increasing drag, which means more grip without penalty on the straight. Additionally, the edge vortices generated at the corners of the ground are incredibly stable, helping to seal the aerodynamic flow even under strong compressions or ride height changes. And therein lies the real genius. because the car is not only fast, it's predictable, which allows the pilot, in this case Piastri, to attack the limit without fear of the unknown. It's not simply about having more downforce than rivals. It's about having it right when you need it most, at the entrance to the curve, in the middle of the apex, at the exit. That was what made the difference in SQ3 in Qatar. Every millisecond gained came from a sum of trust fractions. Another key factor was thermal management. The MCL39 has demonstrated an outstanding ability to keep tires within the optimal temperature window throughout the turn. Thanks to a sophisticated heat distribution between brakes, tires, and internal flow channeling, the car not only maximizes mechanical grip, but maintains it consistently lap after lap, something essential in night conditions like those at Lusail, where air density is greater, but so are the thermal demands on the compounds. In short, MCL39 did not explode in Qatar. It was simply understood. And it was Oscar Piastri who managed to read that hidden language before anyone else. While other teams continue to search for answers, McLaren already has one. Its car works. And now everyone knows it. The sprint qualifying in Qatar not only redefined McLaren's present, it opened a crack of uncertainty, ambition, and also internal conflict. Because what Piastri revealed with that pole was not simply the latent speed of the MCL39. It was the uncomfortable revelation that the car had more performance than even its own team seemed to have acknowledged. And that raises a direct consequence. If that potential was always there, why had no one unlocked it before? But the second consequence, and probably the most critical, is internal. Because in the fight for the championship, the balance of power between the two McLaren drivers has just been reconfigured. Until now, Lando Norris had been leading the team both in points and in political weight. His experience, his perseverance, and his results made him the undeclared but assumed #1 driver. However, Piastri's pole position in Qatar sends a direct and forceful message. He can also be the team's leader, not as a promise for the future, but as a present reality. And this creates a new dilemma for Andrea Stella and the McLaren coaching staff. How to manage tension when both pilots believe they have arguments to lead the project. Because while Lando has the advantage of consistency in history, Oscar now has the most powerful card. He showed that he can push the car to the highest limit ever seen in 2025. This situation will not only strain the dynamics on the track, it will force the team to be surgical in its strategic decisions. Any team order, any priority in the pits, any allocation of technical resources will be analyzed with a magnifying glass and can unleash friction not only between the drivers, but within McLaren's own environment. In addition, the rest of the grid has also taken note. Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, everyone now knows that McLaren has not shown its full arsenal. And that changes the strategies of the championship. Because the image of a dominating MCL39 is no longer a hypothetical scenario. It is a tangible precedent. And if they manage to replicate it, others will be forced to react with hasty developments, with reliability risks, or with pilot decisions under pressure. What makes this new phase of the season even more fascinating is the underlying tension between certainty and uncertainty. McLaren has found a gold mine, but now it must decide how and when to exploit it. And in that process, you can discover both your greatness and your deepest weaknesses. Because in Formula One, showing potential is only the first step. The real challenge is to convert it into consistency, into victories, into titles. And in that transition, everything can change. For better or for worse. What Oscar Piastri achieved in the Qatar Sprint classification transcends the simple fact of having achieved a pole position. It was a turning point, a moment where the technical and competitive script of the season was rewritten. Because in a championship as tight as 2025, a tenth of a second not only changes a position on the grid, it can alter the balance of forces of the entire World Cup. And that is exactly what happened in Lusail. But this story doesn't end there. In fact, it's just beginning. Because what opens now is a new chapter full of unanswered questions, possible paths, and key decisions. Will this be the true rebirth of McLaren as a dominant force, not only in qualifying but also in the race? Can Piastri consolidate this moment as his definitive leap into the elite of title contenders? And how will Lando Norris, the driver who until now carried the team's flag, respond to seeing that his own teammate has found a more effective way to squeeze the car? Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.